Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Janie Maud, and we'll be diving into unlocking data resilience with orchestrated recovery, leveraging Veeam Recovery Orchestrator here in a moment. We're just going to allow a few more people to join our lobby before we dive in. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Janie Mott. I'm an Inside Systems Engineer here at Veeam, and I'll be walking us through unlocking data resilience, leveraging orchestrator recovery and Veeam Recovery Orchestrator today. Now, I know this is something on the forefront of everyone's mind as ransomware and malware threats become more of a win than if scenario. And this is something that IT teams are working to kind of enhance in the environment because the downtime is a business loss. And having those orchestrated plans that are tested and checked against your SLAs, those can ensure that you and your business and your team are up and running with as little downtime as possible. So to jump right in, we're going to go ahead and take a look at some statistics. Now, this is from a report. It's from the Data Protection Trends Report. The QR code in the top right corner, you can scan if you would like to read a little bit more about. But what this is kind of taken a survey from about 1,200 IT professionals, and we asked them, did your recovery meet your SLA? So those required recovery time objectives as well as recovery point objectives. Were you able to meet those targets? And so 58% of those servers met their SLAs during a DR test. Now, something to read into here. What this 58% means is these are going to be companies and teams that have tested and documented and orchestrated and automated processes in place for their IT disaster recovery, if you will. And that we can read as 58% is mostly a passing grade because we can be assured that at least 58% of those servers are going to recover. For those teams that do not have orchestrated and automated tested plans, that's going to be more of a concern. We're not sure how often we're going to get those 58% of servers back online working. Now, I get excited to jump into the metrics here, something I didn't mention as we're going along. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please do drop those on the side. You may see there's an option for that. I will address them as we go through, and if I'm not able to hit them all, I will touch on them at the end as well as following up. Touching back to our 58% of servers meeting their SLAs during recovery tests. Again, imagine 2 of those 5 servers not recovering when you need them and what that would mean for the business impact. Only 32% of orgs can recover a 50 server site within a business week. So imagine in the time of those outages, how much business is lost within that singular business week. And you can see the breakdown down below. Again, that QR code will take you to some more information as well related, but we can see here the breakdown of those who have not run a large scale recovery test in the last year and those who were able to recover a majority of their environment and kind of the spread there, if you will. As I mentioned, these recovery tests to make sure that we're at least hitting 58% of those servers to recover, that is going to include automated testing. Now, Veeam Recovery Orchestrator is going to make this much easier for you in your environment. We'll walk through the environment in a moment just to see what it looks like to generate these recovery plans as well as test them. So Veeam will kind of make that automation testing easy. It'll also take the headache out of documentation and compliance. If you've leveraged our Veeam1 reporting and documentation software, the reports are going to look very similar for the DR tests you run. It'll break them down by policy, orchestration plans, those SLAs we mentioned with recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives as well. And of course, down at the bottom, when you have those automated and tested disaster recovery plans in place, you're going to recover faster from any disaster, especially versus if you did not have a plan in place at all, or if it weren't documented or orchestrated. So I'm going to pause here, take a quick breath. We're just kind of hopping in. I am going to go ahead and pull up the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator itself, and we can take a look through. Again, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to post those in the side. I'm going to stop sharing here so I can pull up my lab for you all. And here we go. All right, if everybody can see my screen here, this is my Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. Now, something I like to include if you haven't deployed Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, if you're looking to, if you have an existing Veeam backup and replication server environment where VBR is deployed, you will need to deploy this on a secondary machine. If this is your first time kind of deploying Veeam backup and replication, Veeam1 and Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, this can be done in the same environment. Just a little side note there from my experience in pre-sales. So pivoting back here, we can actually take a look at the dashboard itself. There's quite a bit going on, but I always like to say the recovery orchestrator is typically going to break down into threes. So we can see here, we're going to have our plan execution, our plan readiness check, and then that plan data lab testing where we can kind of test the environment to make sure that those recoveries are viable and test gets those SLAs as we mentioned. Quite a few things going on here. Just from a high level overview, we can see kind of top plans by recovery point issues, top plans by recovery time issues, again, making sure we're adhering to those SLAs there. And we can see any current issues in the environment to quickly address those issues. I'll point out in a minute, I mentioned Veeam1. This will also tie into your Veeam1 environment. Showing here, we have our inventory. Now, something I also did not mention, and you all may be aware, is we recently did our version 7.2 release, and we're very excited that Hyper-V will now be compatible with our Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. What this means is this will allow for VMware VMs to be recovered to Azure Hyper-V environments. We do have some orchestration that we can leverage with Hyper-V, mainly when it comes to recovery to other Hyper-V environments, but we are excited for this growth and expansion for the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator to Hyper-V. Now, I don't have it in my lab yet, unfortunately not able to show that off today, but it is something we're working on. And if you would like to see, you can always reach out to your sales team, and a pre-sales engineer like myself or others can walk you through that once we get it squared away in our lab. But for right now, we can kind of see the inventory we're working with. We can see our original VMware vSphere environment, VM location. We can see our secondary site. Of course, we're going to need those two hypervisors if we want to kind of replicate across those hypervisor environments. Then we also have that Azure environment that we can recover to as well. We've also got our groups here. Something to point out, if you are leveraging tags on your vSphere environment or your hypervisor environment, this will help organize any of those disaster recovery plans in your Veeam Recovery Orchestrator environment. So extremely useful to have those tags in place, can really help with the dynamic aspect of setting up those DR programs. As a VM is added to that grouping, we can know it's added to that DR plan. Now we can kind of hop into the meat of it here, the recovery plans themselves. Once we generate these recovery plans, we have quite a few options. So I'll kind of walk us through setting up an initial recovery plan. So I have a few in place right now, but kind of like to show from the start. So I can see here, I have a new recovery plan, simple enough. Something to note before I jump in here, we are leveraging existing backup jobs. You can also leverage CDP replicas and replicas within your VBR environment. Veeam Recovery Orchestrator will connect to the Veeam Backup and Veeam Backup and Replication environments, and that will allow you to orchestrate these plans. So I'll go ahead and give mine our real original name here for our lab today. You can insert all the details you would like, contact names, emails, things of that nature. And then we have our options here. I mentioned CDP replica options. Replica, we can also recover from specific storage volumes, restore to a different environment. I mentioned that VMware to Hyper-V environment. Now that we see that there, very exciting. And then of course we can recover to cloud as we saw with our Azure environment. I'm going to go ahead and do a restore to another VMware environment. But again, there are quite a few options you can go down, but just to show you. Again, very exciting, the potentials for the Hyper-V backups here, but we're just going to go ahead and select the vSphere. Currently, I'll pick on my engineering tab. And then we see here those recovery locations. Now, we could see the recovery locations a moment ago in that tab, and now we can select to recover from our original VM environment to our secondary environment. And then once we've selected that recovery location, we have a few customizable options. Veeam loves their granularity. We can choose how a VM is recovered if it runs into a problem, if you'd like to halt the plan or proceed with the plan, maybe skipping a VM in the sequence. Then you can also choose how the VMs are recovered in each group, whether that's in parallel, in sequence, or if you would like to recover a simultaneous amount, you can kind of set the max there. You can also choose to select those VM tags. Great for keeping that environment organized when it is time to recover, or if you have to recover, I should say. Now, our VM steps. There are quite a few here. You can see, again, quite a few. Some of the more often selected steps are we can check that VM heartbeat, restore the VM. Obviously, that's what we're trying to do today. Some other I see that are used quite often is antivirus check. Any antivirus that is installed in the environment which your Veeam recovery orchestrator lives, server, VM, what have you, that will be able to leverage that kind of local antivirus to check for those recoveries. We can do a couple other things. We can do VM power options if we wanted to power off those VMs. Again, quite a bit of options here. Once we have selected our initial inventory group we're recovering from, or we're recovering to, some selected options there, we can choose to protect that inventory group as it is recovered. Now, this is great in the case of in a DR scenario, you are already in your team are probably addressing some other fires at the time. If you can have this restoration plan and process, what it'll do is it will restore, and Veeam will automatically back up that new recovered environment in the secondary location, so you don't have to go in and manually select that. So just one less thing off you and your team's plate in the case of a disaster. Now, I mentioned testing against recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives, and we can see here we can set those. You can edit these at any time, and I'll show you in a moment how we can actually kind of walk through and test these in various ways. And with that testing, we can also generate that reporting, automating that process for the report generation. And you can select a template. You can also download this template locally and edit it in Word if you would like. But we automatically have that Veeam default template, which we'll take a look at in a moment. And then we mentioned the automation process. So we can go ahead and automate this report scheduling here. We can update the plan definition, which Veeam will create for you, and we'll see here in a moment. And we can perform a plan readiness check daily if we'd like to make sure that we can adhere to all the metrics on our readiness plan. Veeam makes kind of documenting this process and the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator extremely easy. You can copy any of the summary at any point for your admin purposes if you would like. And that's setting up our restore plan. I am at a temporary lap, so I'm going to cancel out of my existing plan that we just generated, but I do have some existing plans we can pull from. I'm going to take a moment because I see a question. Is CDP working with Azure, AWS, or AVS yet, or still work in progress? To my understanding, Tom, it is still a work in progress. However, I will touch base with our team. The one consideration there when we're talking about having continuous data replication to the cloud, the cost concern, but I will absolutely look into that and see if that's on the roadmap for you, Tom. Thanks for those questions. Go ahead and pop back over here. We went ahead and set up that plan readiness check for those who are with us. And now we can kind of look at a few different options. So one of the more recent options that I do like to point out, because Veeam has been expanding when it comes to malware and ransomware detection here. Go ahead and enable this plan. I'm editing my existing plan. What I really want to show you here is the potential for that malware detection. Now, don't mind me verifying security there to actually get this job enabled. You can see recovery locations here. That report we talked about, we'll take a look at in a moment. And then we have the option for malware detection. Now, this is going to be limited to only Windows computers. If you're recovering to any environment, as long as it has a Windows kind of backup, we are able to run that malware test, again, leveraging that local antivirus software. So we can actually choose to check malware flags on a minimum or maximum of a certain amount of restore points. You can choose, if there are no clean restore points, you can restore without connecting to any network to do some sort of damage control. And then you can turn on additional malware checks as well if you would like to leverage a virus scan or those YAR rules, which you can also leverage in Veeam Backup and Replication. You can also leverage in your recovery orchestrator. Now, why am I so excited about this? It might be a bit obvious, but I'm going to say it anyways. In the event of a disaster, if you have to recover, this is going to be that extra layer of reassurance that you do not have an infected environment. You can restore to a clean environment. We are actually kind of expanding with clean rooms. And this will just allow for kind of an easier recovery process in a clean environment that we know is not infected or impacted by a bad actor. So we're excited about that. But there are a few other things we can also do in our recovery orchestrator. Slow it down a little bit. We mentioned a couple different tests here. We have that plan definition. We have the plan execution test, making sure we can adhere to all of those SLAs, those recovery time objectives, or recovery point objectives. The data lab test, a sidebar here. You will need to set up an isolated sure backup lab in your Veeam backup and replication environment. What this will do will connect to your Veeam recovery orchestrator environment and allow you to run those isolated tests in your environment. Again, just making sure there are no signs or symptoms of malware, ransomware, any kind of corruption in the backup, things of that nature. I mentioned those data labs here. I can see I have my singular data lab at one of my Veeam backup and replication deployments here. We can power that on from our Veeam recovery orchestrator if we would like. Our lab calendar, I mentioned automating this process in itself. We can set these reports to actually run in these tests to run on the calendar. So you can see here all the various tests I have running. In an ideal world, you have your backup set up. Maybe you're checking them with a sure backup, even if it's just kind of the more mainstream backup. You have your Veeam one sending you reports to the environment to make sure you're not overlooking any anomalies. You have your Veeam recovery orchestrator, which is also going to be testing those disaster recovery plans, along with the Veeam one sending those automated reports to your inbox. That way you don't have to worry. Is your disaster recovery plan going to work? You have documented evidence that it's going to work. Not only that, we work with a lot of teams who have cybersecurity insurance, and oftentimes, if you work with your cybersecurity insurance and let them know you have detailed documented plan, they can offer a few incentives there, if you will. So that's also something to look into. I keep talking about this reporting, so we might as well go ahead and take a look at it. We can go ahead and take a look at the summary here. I'll go ahead and open my file. So we can see a kind of detailed report. Again, if you've used Veeam 1, this is going to look very similar. So this is going to be the data lab test report itself. We get the contents, the recovery plan report itself, a nice cover page that we just saw, summary, any pre-planned steps. We kind of saw previously the check VM heartbeat and recover VM was part of those steps. Those AV checks, things of that nature would also potentially be part of those steps. Then we can see any groupings there. So in our example previously, I used our Veeam, or excuse me, our vSphere engineering tag. So that'll be the grouping if we ran a report on that test. Any group details, and then any post-plan steps as well. Nice cover page. You can edit this to your liking if you would like. You can also add your own company logo at the top so it doesn't just say Veeam. And then we get our nice summary here. So any issues will be listed up top to make that kind of nice and concise, get right to the point there. Those execution details, schedule details here, any of the kind of plan steps we mentioned, also kind of breaks that down into the time. And again, those RPOs and RTOs we set, we can see the check here, making sure they met those requirements to pass. This goes on, again, we can see those various steps. It's just a licensing check, those groupings that we mentioned here. And again, those steps that we talked about for those various groupings, just kind of taking you through what this report would look like and kind of how to interpret it here. And again, these are our various kind of web server recovery steps here and any post-plan steps. Going to go ahead and pivot back here. Something I do like to show off because I think it kind of helps you see a little bit more into the environment is the administrator view. But I'm happy to take a pause as we're kind of recovering and digesting all of our recovery orchestrator plans. And this is just kind of rephrasing what we saw in our kind of forward view, but this is kind of a higher level overview into the environment and our options here. We can see the entire environment we're leveraging, Veeam data platform, making sure everything's healthy, cloud recovery environments, things of that nature. We have our Veeam Threat Center, which I will pull up here in a moment. That is going to be connecting to our Veeam 1 environment. This will just allow, if you have not seen our Veeam Threat Hunter dashboard, this just kind of allows for easier access to view the environment itself and to just get a quick look into any threats in the environment. And then here we can see we're connected. If we have multiple Veeam backup and replication deployments, we would see those here. I just have my one connection here. vSphere environments, any Azure environment here, as well as any storage. If we were to leverage any storage repositories, you can kind of remove that data from the storage, leveraging the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. And then a few other things here, those recovery locations we mentioned. Something else back here is we can kind of get a nice overview of all those steps that we saw that were rather condensed, pinging VM network, things of those actions, as well as credentials will be saved with your Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. So just a few other things to point out, any logs as well, any action taken within the environment can be leveraged here. I know that's a point that a lot of my users like to be able to access. So I'll take a pause here, stop sharing my screen for a moment, and I'll pull up the Veeam Threat Center in our Veeam 1 environment here. Again, any questions in the meantime, feel free to post those down. All right. So kind of wrapping it up here, I know we had an hour on the clock. Veeam Recovery Orchestrator is a bit kind of easy to manage, navigate, a little bit of setup as we mentioned with that isolated lab, but with the security features and the automation process with kind of setting up those recovery plans, it really is worth the peace of mind. And for a lot of my end users, saving them time for generating the reports for their higher ups for these DR plans and working with cybersecurity insurance, it's just easier to have this as an automated process. Not to mention, if we were in a DR scenario, this can truly save a lot of time and a lot of money for your business. I digress, posting back to our Veeam Threat Center. As I mentioned, this is going to tie in with Veeam 1 and your Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, as well as your VBR dashboard as well. My environment has purposely been infected. You might be having a very bad day if you log in and see this, but I just want to show you here, you get a nice little scorecard and it breaks it down, platform security compliance. Side note, this is actually working with your best practices analyzer as well in your Veeam backup and replication environment. So this will kind of reflect the kind of how well you're meeting those best practices and security recommendations as well. But we can see here, platform security compliance. You can generate a report off each of these metrics. Data recovery health, great, we're doing good there. Data protection status, looks like we need some love, as well as the backup immutability status, which we all know quite a few ways to enable immutability in our background, whether that's through an object storage, Linux hardened repository. We now have the ISO for that. But some things that are sometimes overlooked in the environment from a security standard or practice. It's nice to have a dashboard to come to be able to access and again, see the overview of if there is a bad actor or any malicious files or encrypted files in your environment, you can actually see the infected restore points. You can go through and kind of view the SLA overview here as well. Just to show off, since we got another minute, again, we can go ahead and generate a report from the Security and Compliance Analyzer. We can do this for each of these kind of breakdowns, if you will, for the security and compliance. And again, this is through the Veeam-1 interface. We have this nice report here, and we can kind of see where we are compliant, where there are compliance checks, maybe things that were missed, and things of that nature. So I'll pause here. I do see there are a couple questions. I'm gonna go and pivot back to those. Scott asks, can you configure the use of MFA on the orchestrator? So Scott, you can definitely enable the use of the MFA on the Veeam Backup and Replication console. For the Enterprise Manager itself, I do not believe so, but I'm always happy to look and make sure I'm not overlooking something, especially when it comes to MFA. It's quite easy to kind of apply in the environment. So if we can, might as well look. But I'll look and see, if not, what are others doing? Let me go ahead and jot this down. Where is the lab, our hardware or Veeam? Good question. So the data lab is going to be leveraging your hardware where your Veeam backup and replication environment is deployed. You will use that to set up that lab itself, Brandon. And I'm happy to send you documentation for that. Yeah, absolutely. And I have another question from Matthias. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but hello, I have a quick question. Does Veeam Orchestrator restore VMs in Nutanix environments? So as of right now, our Veeam Recovery Orchestrator does not work with Nutanix AHV environments, but you can now leverage Veeam Backup and Replication. We have a new kind of plugin, if you will, for our AHV backups that kind of allow for you to recover VMs in a Nutanix environment. You can recover those to Azure. So I would definitely look into that, Matthias. I'm going to try to get a link to everybody's contact and send out this information. If not, I might ping you on LinkedIn. So just to kind of recap, Orchestrator is not working with Nutanix currently. Yep, and Chris asked for the lab setup docs as well. Absolutely. And just making sure I didn't miss anything. Feel free to reach out, ping me on LinkedIn if you have any additional questions. I'm going to, okay, Alan would also like lab docs. Feel free to go ahead and post MFA docs, Andrea. Great, perfect. And if you could, drop your email in the chat. That'll make my life a lot easier. Thanks, Brandon. All right, I'm gonna leave this open for just another minute as we're dropping in emails. I'll probably go quiet here, but thank you all so much for your time. Hope we were able to help you out today, and we will be in touch. Thanks to everybody.